Broken Cowboy Dreams. Dolly McGraw had spent years trying to forget Jessie Tate, the gunslinger who left her heart in ruins. But when he rode back into town dusty, battered, and staring straight at her, she knew trouble had returned. He leaned against the saloon door, voice slow as molasses. "Still mad at me, darlin'?" he murmured. "Or just mad that you never stopped waitin'?" Chapter 1. The Return of Shadows and Dust. The wind, a restless wanderer across the parched plains, whipped through Redemption, Arizona, carrying with it the scent of dust and the faintest whisper of sage. It rattled the weathered sign above the rusty Spur Saloon, a lonely sentinel on the edge of a town clinging precariously to life. Dolly McGraw, or Dolly as most folks knew her, stood on the porch of the general store, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun bled crimson into the gathering dusk. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting the vast emptiness soothe the familiar ache in her heart. An ache that had taken root years ago, the day Jessie Tate rode out of her life, leaving behind a void as vast as the desert sky. Dolly wasn't a young woman anymore. Lines etched by sun and sorrow framed her still vibrant blue eyes, eyes that had seen too much hardship, too much loss. Her hands, calloused from years of working the small ranch she'd inherited from her pa, were steady as she adjusted the worn leather belt around her waist. The weight of the Colt Peacemaker holstered there was a familiar comfort, a reminder of the resilience she'd cultivated in this unforgiving land. She'd learned to be strong, to be self-reliant, to bury the dreams of a young girl beneath the practicalities of survival. A cloud of dust, larger than the usual desert swirls, appeared on the horizon. Dolly squinted, her heart giving a strange, hesitant flutter. It couldn't be. He wouldn't dare. Yet, as the figure on horseback drew closer, the familiar silhouette solidified, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening chill. It was him, Jessie Tate. He was older, harder, the lines around his eyes deeper, etched by experiences she could only imagine. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a low ponytail, revealing the sharp angles of his jaw, dusted with a few days' worth of stubble. He wore the same worn leather duster he'd favored years ago, the one that always seemed to swallow him whole, making him appear both dangerous and vulnerable. The setting sun glinted off the silver buckle of his gun belt, a stark reminder of the life he'd chosen, the life that had taken him away from her. He reined in his horse, a magnificent black stallion that snorted and pawed the ground, mirroring the turmoil brewing within Dolly. The horse's coat shone even in the fading light, well cared for, an oddity when the rider looked so battle-worn. Jessie dismounted with a fluid grace that belied the stiffness she knew he must be feeling after a long ride. He stood there, a statue carved from the very essence of the Wild West, his gaze locked on hers. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the creak of leather and the distant howl of a coyote. The town, usually bustling with the end-of-day activities, seemed to hold its breath, every eye drawn to the drama unfolding before them. Dolly felt a familiar tremor of fear, a ghost of the girl she'd been, the girl who'd believed in his promises. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew the bitter taste of betrayal. He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing just a few feet away, the scent of leather, gunpowder, and something indefinably him filling the space between them. He leaned against the hitching post, a casual pose that did nothing to hide the tension coiled within him. His eyes, the same dark, intense eyes that had once held her captive, searched hers, a silent question hanging in the air. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and gravelly, like stones tumbling down a mountainside, yet it still held the same melodic quality that used to send shivers down her spine. "Still mad at me, darlin'?" he murmured, the words slow as molasses, each syllable dripping with a mixture of challenge and something that sounded dangerously close to regret. Dolly's hand instinctively moved to the butt of her Colt, her fingers tracing the familiar curves. She met his gaze, her own eyes narrowed, refusing to betray the turmoil raging within her.
Mel?
she repeated, her voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor she felt inside. Mad is for rabid dogs, Jesse. I'm just disappointed. He chuckled, a low, humorless sound that grated on her nerves. Disappointed? That's a new one. Usually it's go to hell, Jesse. Or I hope you rot in a shallow grave. I've grown up, Jesse, Dolly said, her voice tight. I've learned that wishing ill on someone doesn't change the past. It just poisons the present. He pushed himself off the hitching post, taking another step closer, invading her personal space, the space she'd guarded so fiercely for so long. And what about the future, Dolly? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, his breath warm on her face. Is there any room in your present for a future that might involve me? Dolly's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the gathering night. She wanted to slap him, to scream at him, to demand answers for the years of silence, the years of wondering. But she also wanted to something else. Something she refused to acknowledge, something she'd buried deep within the hardened shell she'd built around her heart. Or just mad that you never stopped waiting? He added, the corner of his mouth tilting in a half-smile that was both infuriating and captivating. The question was a direct hit, a bullet to the heart of her carefully constructed defenses. She swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure. Don't flatter yourself, Tate. I stopped waiting a long time ago. It was a lie, a blatant, desperate lie, and they both knew it. The air crackled with unspoken truths, with the ghosts of shared dreams and broken promises. The wind, which has quieted, whipped up a small whirlwind near them, a miniature replica of her inner emotions. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something that might have been amusement, or perhaps pain, crossing his features. Is that so? Then why is your hand still on your gun, darlin'? And why are you tremblin' like a leaf in a hurricane? Dolly forced herself to relax her grip on the Colt, her hand dropping to her side. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze head-on. I'm not trembling, she lied again, her voice betraying a slight waver. And this, she gestured to her gun, is just habit. A woman alone in this town learns to be prepared. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Prepared for what, Dolly? Prepared for me? The loaded question hung in the dusty air, a challenge and a plea all wrapped into one. He glanced quickly to the saloon behind him and back to Dolly. A decision was in his eyes. A decision she was sure she didn't want to know about. Before she could answer, a shout rang out from across the street. Jesse! Jesse Tate! Is that really you? A burly man, his face flushed with drink, stumbled out of the saloon, his hand hovering near the gun on his hip. It was Bart Higgins, a known troublemaker, a man with a grudge against Jesse that went back years, a grudge Dolly knew all too well. A grudge, she suddenly remembered with chilling clarity, that involved a stolen shipment of gold, a double cross, and a man left for dead in the desert. A man Jesse had claimed was Bart's doing. But Bart had always sworn it was Jesse. Chapter 2. Echoes in the empty saloon. Dolly's hand tightened on her own gun, her instincts screaming at her to intervene. She knew Bart Higgins. He was a bully, a coward, and a drunk, but he was also dangerous when cornered. And right now, fueled by whiskey and years of simmering resentment, he looked very much cornered. The few townsfolk who had been lingering in the street quickly scattered, disappearing into doorways and shadows, leaving Dolly and Jesse alone in the gathering dusk, facing a potentially deadly confrontation. Bart, Jesse said, his voice calm and steady, devoid of any fear. Put the bottle down and go home. You're drunk. Bart staggered forward, his eyes narrowed, his hand now firmly gripping the butt of his revolver. I ain't going nowhere, Tate. Not until we settle this. Once and for all. You left me for dead out there. You backstabbing son of a— He didn't finish the sentence, his words slurring into an incoherent mumble. That was a long time ago, Bart, Jesse said, his gaze unwavering. And, you know damn well I didn't leave you for dead. You were the one who pulled the double cross. Liar! Bart roared, his face contorted with rage. You took the gold. You left me with nothing, and you framed me for it. I spent 5 years in Yuma prison because of you." Dolly knew the story, or at least the version Bart had told. She'd heard it whispered in the saloon, muttered in the general store, repeated in hushed tones whenever Jesse Tate's name was mentioned. It was a story of betrayal and greed, a story that had painted Jesse as a ruthless outlaw, a man who would do anything for gold. But there was another side to the story, a side that Jesse had never fully revealed, a side that Dolly had desperately tried to believe, even as her heart ached with the pain of his abandonment. "I didn't frame you, Bart," Jesse said, his voice still surprisingly calm. "You framed yourself. You were the one who got greedy. You were the one who tried to take it all. I just reacted." "Reacted?" Bart spat, his hand trembling on his gun. "You call shootin' a man in the back reactin'?" Dolly saw Jesse's jaw tighten, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "I didn't shoot you in the back, Bart. And you know it. You drew on me first. You're a liar, Tate." Bart yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "And I'm gonna kill you for it." He lunged forward, drawing his gun with a clumsy, drunken motion. Dolly reacted instinctively, her own gun drawn and aimed before she even consciously realized what she was doing. But Jesse was faster. He moved with a lightning-fast speed that defied his seemingly relaxed posture, his own gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. 2 shots rang out, almost simultaneously, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Bart stumbled backward, his gun falling from his hand, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He clutched at his chest, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. He looked at Jesse, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossing his features, before collapsing in a heap on the dusty ground. Silence descended once more, broken only by the heavy breathing of the 2 gunslingers and Dolly's own racing heart. Jesse slowly lowered his gun, his gaze fixed on Bart's lifeless body. Dolly kept her gun trained on Jesse, her mind reeling from the sudden violence. She hadn't wanted to shoot, hadn't even thought about it, but the years of living on the frontier had honed her instincts, made her a survivor. He drew first," Jesse said, his voice hoarse, his gaze still fixed on Bart. "I didn't want to kill him." Dolly slowly lowered her own gun, her hand trembling. She believed him. She saw the regret in his eyes, the weariness in his posture. She knew he wasn't a cold-blooded killer, despite what the rumors said. But she also knew that this would only complicate things, make his return even more dangerous. "You need to leave, Jesse," she said, her voice low and urgent.
"Now.
Before the sheriff gets here." Jesse finally looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Leave? After I just got here?" "This changes everything," Dolly said, her voice tight. "Bart has friends, family. They'll come after you. This town, it's not safe for you anymore." "And what about you, Dolly?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you safe?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Dolly knew what he was asking. He was asking if she was safe from him, from the feelings he still stirred within her, from the danger he represented. "I can take care of myself," she said, her voice firm, though her heart betrayed a flicker of doubt. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers, trying to see past the walls she'd built around her heart. "I know you can," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean I want you to have to." He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over hers. Dolly flinched, but didn't pull away. His fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was a touch that spoke of shared history, of lingering desire, of a connection that had never truly been broken. "I came back for a reason, Dolly," he said, his voice low and husky. "And it wasn't to settle old scores. I came back for you." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. The sheriff and his deputies were on their way. Jesse pulled his hand back, his eyes hardening. "I need to go," he said, his voice urgent. "But I'm not leaving for good. I'll be back. I promise you that." He turned and walked towards his horse, his movements swift and purposeful. He mounted the stallion in one fluid motion, then looked back at Dolly, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret, determination, and something that looked dangerously close to love. Wait for me, darlin', he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed the thunder of his horse's hooves as he galloped away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Dolly standing alone in the dusty street, her heart a tangled mess of fear, hope, and a longing she'd tried so hard to bury. The saloon doors swung closed, silently. She stared at the spot he'd left, suddenly missing even the echo of him in the empty saloon. Chapter 3. A bargain struck under the desert moon. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Jedediah Stone, arrived with his deputies, their horses' hooves pounding a frantic rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The scene that greeted them was stark. Bart Higgins lying dead in the street, Dolly standing nearby, her gun still smoking, and the lingering scent of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. Jedediah dismounted, his eyes narrowed, assessing the situation with a practiced gaze. He knew Dolly, respected her, even. He knew she wasn't one for trouble, but he also knew the volatile history between Jesse Tate and Bart Higgins. Dolly, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. What in tarnation happened here? Dolly holstered her gun, her hands still slightly trembling. She recounted the events as clearly and concisely as she could, omitting only Jesse's parting words, his promise to return. She didn't want to give Jedediah any more reason to hunt him down than he already had. Jedediah listened patiently, his gaze flickering between Dolly and Bart's lifeless body. He knew Jesse Tate's reputation, knew the rumors of his outlaw past. He also knew that Bart Higgins was no saint, that he'd likely provoked the confrontation. But the law was the law, and a man was dead. He drew first, Jedediah, Dolly said, her voice firm, meeting his gaze directly. Jesse, he defended himself. Jedediah sighed, running a hand over his weathered face. I believe you, Dolly. But that ain't gonna matter much to Bart's kin. They'll be looking for blood, and Jesse Tate's is the only kind they'll want. He looked around at the gathering crowd, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. All right, folks, he said, his voice booming, show's over. Go on home. And someone fetch Doc Miller to take care of the remains. The crowd dispersed, leaving Dolly alone with Jedediah and his deputies. The sheriff turned back to Dolly, his expression softening slightly. You know he's gonna be hunted, Dolly, he said, his voice low. Not just by Bart's family, but by every bounty hunter and lawman in the territory. He's got a price on his head, a hefty one. Dolly nodded, her heart heavy. She knew the risks, had known them the moment Jesse rode back into town. But she also knew that she couldn't stand idly by and let him be hunted down like an animal. He's not the man they say he is, Jedediah, she said, her voice pleading. He's changed. He came back for a reason. Jedediah raised an eyebrow, a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. And what reason is that, Dolly? Dolly hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She couldn't tell him the truth, not all of it. But she needed to give him something to make him at least consider the possibility that Jesse wasn't just another ruthless outlaw. He wants to clear his name, she said, choosing her words carefully. He wants to prove he didn't steal that gold, that he didn't leave Bart for dead. He wants to start over. Jedediah studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. He knew she was holding something back, but he also sensed her sincerity. He'd always had a soft spot for Dolly, admired her strength and resilience. All right, Dolly, he said finally, his voice softening. I'll give him a chance. A small one. I'll put out the word that I'm looking for him, but I won't send out a posse. Not yet. But if he causes any more trouble, if he kills anyone else, all bets are off. Understand? Dolly nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and trepidation. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance, a sliver of hope in a situation that seemed increasingly hopeless. Thank you, Jedediah, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I appreciate it. Don't thank me yet, Dolly, he said, his expression grim. This ain't gonna be easy. Jesse Tate, he's a hard man to find, and an even harder man to catch. And even if he does clear his name, there's still the matter of Bart's death. His family, they'll be out for revenge. He paused, his gaze shifting towards the horizon, where the last sliver of the sun had disappeared, leaving the sky a canvas of deep purple and fiery orange. He's got one day, Dolly. One day to prove his innocence, to make things right. After that, I'm comin' after him. Dolly watched him walk away, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. One day. It wasn't much time, but it was all she had. She knew she had to find Jesse, to warn him, to help him. But where would she even begin to look? As the moon climbed high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the desert, Dolly made her way back to her ranch. The house, a small, weathered structure that had stood for generations, felt empty and lonely without her father. She lit a lantern, the flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the familiar objects that filled the room: a worn leather saddle, a stack of old books, a faded photograph of her parents. She sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing. She needed a plan, a way to find Jesse before it was too late. She thought about the places they used to go, the hidden canyons and secret trails they'd explored together as children. She remembered a particular spot, a secluded oasis nestled deep within the heart of the desert, a place where they'd carved their initials into a towering rock, a symbol of their youthful love, a love that had been shattered by betrayal and circumstance. A sudden thought struck her, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, he'd go there. Maybe he'd remember their secret place, their shared past. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. She stood up, her decision made. She wouldn't wait for him to come to her. She would go to him. She would find him, warn him, and help him clear his name, even if it meant risking her own life. The desert wind howled outside, a mournful cry that echoed the turmoil in her heart. Under the vast, star-studded desert sky, Dolly struck a silent bargain with the moon, a promise to fight for the man she loved, the outlaw who had returned to claim not only his past, but perhaps her future as well. She felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold, and everything to do with the unknown that awaited her. Chapter 4. Scars of the Past, Whispers of the Future. The journey to the oasis was arduous, a testament to the unforgiving nature of the desert. Dolly rode her trusty mare, Bess, a sturdy Appaloosa who had been her companion for years. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the sand and turning the air into a shimmering haze. The landscape was desolate, a vast expanse of rock and scrub, broken only by the occasional towering saguaro cactus, standing like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the past. Dolly's body ached, her muscles protesting from the long hours in the saddle. Her lips were cracked and dry, her throat parched. But she pushed on, driven by a mixture of determination and desperation. She had to reach Jesse, had to warn him about Jedediah's ultimatum, had to help him find a way to clear his name. As she rode, her mind drifted back to the past, to the days when she and Jesse were young and carefree, exploring the desert together, dreaming of a future that had seemed so bright and promising. She remembered his laughter, his smile, the way his eyes used to light up when he looked at her. She remembered the day he'd carved their initials into the rock at the oasis, a symbol of their enduring love, a promise that had been broken so cruelly. She wondered what had happened to him in the years they'd been apart, what had hardened him, what had turned him into the man he was now. She knew he'd been through a lot, had seen things, done things, that had left their mark on him. She saw the scars, both visible and invisible, etched on his face, in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. She also saw something else, something that gave her hope. She saw a flicker of the boy she'd once loved, a glimmer of the goodness that she'd always believed was still there, buried beneath layers of pain and regret. She saw a vulnerability in his eyes, a yearning for something more, something he'd lost, something he was desperately trying to find. The sun began to set, painting the sky in a breathtaking display of color. The desert, so harsh and unforgiving during the day, transformed into a place of ethereal beauty, the shadows lengthening, the air cooling, the silence deepening. Dolly reached the entrance to the canyon, a narrow, winding passage that led to the hidden oasis. She dismounted, letting Bess drink from a small stream that trickled down the canyon walls. She walked the rest of the way, her boots crunching on the gravel, her heart pounding with anticipation. She rounded a bend, and there it was, the oasis, a small, verdant paradise nestled in the heart of the barren landscape. A pool of crystal-clear water shimmered in the fading light, surrounded by lush vegetation, a stark contrast to the surrounding desert. And there, leaning against the towering rock where they'd carved their initials years ago, was Jesse. He was sitting with his back to her, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He looked defeated. Dolly's heart ached at the sight of him, so different from the confident, swaggering outlaw she'd encountered in town. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She didn't know what to expect, how he would react to seeing her. She didn't know if he still felt anything for her, if he even remembered their shared past. "Jesse," she said, her voice soft but firm, breaking the silence. He started, his head snapping up, his eyes widening in surprise. He stood up slowly, turning to face her, his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Something that looked like relief. "Dolly," he said, his voice hoarse, his gaze searching hers. What are you doing here?" "I came to warn you," she said, her voice steady, meeting his gaze directly. "Jedediah knows about Bart. He's given you 1 day to clear your name. After that, he's coming after you." Jesse's expression hardened, the flicker of relief disappearing, replaced by a familiar weariness. "I figured as much," he said, his voice flat. "It was only a matter of time." "There's still time, Jesse," Dolly said, her voice pleading. "We can figure this out. We can find the evidence, prove your innocence." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and hope. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture weary. "It's not that simple, Dolly. The evidence, Chapter 5. The unforgiving line between law and love. It's not that simple, Dolly," Jesse repeated, his voice heavy with the weight of years of accumulated trouble. "The evidence, it's not exactly lying around waiting to be found. It's buried, hidden, twisted by lies and half-truths. And Bart's family, they won't care about the truth. They just want revenge." Dolly stepped closer, her heart aching for the pain she saw etched on his face. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer him comfort, but she hesitated, unsure if he would welcome her touch. "We have to try, Jesse," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her heart. "We can't just give up. There has to be something, someone who knows the truth." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, a flicker of hope rekindled by her unwavering belief in him. He had been alone for so long, carrying the burden of his past, convinced that he was beyond redemption. But Dolly's presence, her faith in him, was a lifeline, a beacon of light in the darkness that had enveloped him. "There was a witness," he said, his voice low, his gaze drifting towards the distant horizon. "A young kid, working as a stable boy at the time. He saw the whole thing, saw Bart draw first, saw me react. But he disappeared, vanished." Chapter 6. Riding through the storm of regret. "Vanished?" Dolly echoed, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, vanished? Did Bart's men?" Jesse shook his head, a grim set to his jaw. "No, I don't think so. At least, I hope not. The kid, Tommy, was quick, resourceful. I think he ran. Scared, probably. He knew if he stayed, he'd be next. So we find Tommy," Dolly said, a surge of determination coursing through her. "He's the key to clearing your name." Jesse looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "It's not that easy, Dolly. That was years ago. He could be anywhere. He could even be dead." "We have to try," Dolly insisted, her voice unwavering. "We have to start somewhere. Do you remember anything about him? Where he was from? Anything that might give us a clue?" Jesse closed his eyes, his mind reaching back through the haze of years, trying to grasp at Chapter 7. Secrets hidden in the canyon's embrace. Jesse closed his eyes, his mind reaching back through the haze of years, trying to grasp at fleeting memories. The dusty, chaotic scene of the shootout replayed in his mind, but the image of the stable boy, Tommy, remained frustratingly elusive. He mentioned his mother, Jesse said slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. Said she worked at a boarding house. Somewhere north of here. I think it was called Willow Creek. Yes, Willow Creek. He said she made the best apple pie in the territory. Dolly's heart leaped with a flicker of hope. Willow Creek. It was a small town a few days' ride north, but it was something. A lead, however tenuous. Willow Creek, she repeated, committing the name to memory. We'll go there. We'll find this boarding house. Ask about Tommy's mother. Someone must remember them. Jesse opened his eyes, a glimmer of hope replacing the weariness that had weighed him down. Dolly's unwavering determination, her willingness to risk everything for him, was a powerful force, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. It's a long shot, Dolly, he said, his voice still laced with caution. And it's dangerous. Bart's family, they have connections in Willow Creek. If they find out we're looking for Tommy, we'll be careful, Dolly said, her hand instinctively moving to the Colt at her hip. We'll be discreet. We won't draw attention to ourselves. Jesse looked at her, his gaze lingering on her hand, on the gun that symbolized her strength and resilience. He knew she was capable, that she could handle herself in a fight. But he also knew the dangers of the frontier, the ruthlessness of men like Bart Higgins' kin. He couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to her, of her getting caught in the crossfire of his past. I should go alone, he said, his voice firm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of reluctance. It's my mess, my responsibility. I won't drag you into this. Dolly met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. You're not dragging me into anything, Jesse, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to help you. We're in this together. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions, with the echoes of a shared past and the fragile hope of a future together. Jesse looked at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and love. He tried to push her away, to protect her, but her unwavering loyalty, her fierce determination, had broken through his defenses. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was tentative, hesitant, as if he were afraid of breaking something precious. Dolly leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, savoring the warmth of his hand, the feeling of connection that had been missing from her life for so long. Thank you, Dolly, he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. For believing in me. For everything. Dolly opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. I've always believed in you, Jesse, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Even when you made it hard to. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the shadows that had haunted him for so long. It was a smile that reminded her of the boy she'd fallen in love with, the boy who had dreamed of a life beyond the gun and the outlaw trail. The moment stretched, suspended in time, the silence broken only by the gentle murmur of the stream and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The setting sun cast long shadows across the canyon, painting the rocks in hues of orange and purple, creating a scene of breathtaking beauty, a stark contrast to the danger that lurked just beyond the horizon. They stood, looking out to the darkening sky, and a decision solidified. They would ride for Willow Creek at first light. They shared a quick, meager meal of dried meat and water, the silence between them comfortable, filled with a shared understanding, a silent pact forged under the vast, indifferent sky. As darkness enveloped the canyon, the secrets hidden within its embrace seemed to whisper encouragement, a promise of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The only question now was how long before the odds caught up. Chapter 8. Blood on the Badge. Tears in the Sand. The journey to Willow Creek was fraught with tension. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat, every distant rider a possible pursuer. Dolly and Jesse rode in silence for the most part, their senses heightened, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They avoided the main roads, sticking to the less traveled trails, knowing that Bart Higgins' family would be watching for them. They made camp at night in secluded canyons, sharing a meager fire and hushed conversations. The closeness, the shared danger, rekindled the embers of their past relationship, but they both treaded carefully, aware that the present was precarious, the future uncertain. On the third day, as they were nearing Willow Creek, they encountered a sight that made their blood run cold. A lone figure lay sprawled on the trail ahead, his body riddled with bullets, his badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. Jesse dismounted, his hand on his gun, his eyes narrowed, assessing the scene with a practiced gaze. Dolly followed, her heart pounding with a sense of dread. "It's Sheriff Thompson," Jesse said, his voice grim. "From Willow Creek. He was a good man. Honest." Dolly knelt beside the body, her stomach churning with a mixture of anger and sorrow. She recognized the sheriff, a kind, elderly man who had always been fair and just. He had no enemies, except perhaps those who stood on the wrong side of the law. "Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jesse examined the tracks around the body, his expression hardening. "Looks like 4, maybe 5 riders. Headed towards Willow Creek. And they're riding fast." A chilling realization dawned on Dolly. "Bart's family," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're already in Willow Creek. They must have known about Tommy, about the boarding house." Jesse nodded, his jaw tight. "They're not just looking for revenge, Dolly. They're trying to silence anyone who could clear my name. They're trying to bury the truth permanently." He looked at the sheriff's lifeless body, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and regret. "I should have stayed away," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "My coming back, it's brought nothing but death and destruction." Dolly reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "It's not your fault, Jesse," she said, her voice firm. "You didn't kill the sheriff. Bart's family did. They're the ones responsible. But I'm the reason they're here," he said, his voice laced with self-reproach. "My past, it's casting a long shadow, Dolly. And it's engulfing everything in its darkness." Dolly stood up, her eyes filled with determination. "We can't let them win, Jesse," she said, her voice resolute. "We can't let them silence the truth. We have to find Tommy before it's too late." She looked towards Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the distance, its buildings shimmering in the heat haze. It looked peaceful, idyllic, but Dolly knew that beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, a storm of violence and vengeance. "We have to be careful," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They'll be watching for us. They'll be expecting us." Jesse nodded, his hand tightening on his gun. "I know," he said, his voice grim. "But I'm not afraid of them. I'm not running anymore." He mounted his horse, his eyes filled with a steely determination. Dolly mounted Bess, her own heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. They rode towards Willow Creek, 2 figures silhouetted against the setting sun, riding into the heart of danger, their love and loyalty tested by the unforgiving realities of the frontier. The sand swirled, and it seemed to Dolly that even the tears shed on it were quickly dried and whisked away, leaving nothing but hard, bitter ground. Chapter 9. The Price of Redemption, the Cost of Trust. Willow Creek was a town on edge. The news of Sheriff Thompson's murder had spread like wildfire, casting a pall of fear and suspicion over the community. Strangers were viewed with distrust. Whispers followed Dolly and Jesse as they rode through the dusty streets, their every move scrutinized. They found the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure with a faded sign that read Willow Creek Rest. It looked ordinary, unassuming, yet Dolly knew that within its walls, secrets might be hidden, secrets that could cost them their lives. They dismounted, tying their horses to the hitching post, their hands never far from their guns. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the creak of the sign and the distant murmur of voices. Jesse took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. He knew that this was their only chance, that if they failed to find Tommy, or if Bart's family found them first, it would be over. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes meeting Dolly's. "And be ready for anything." Dolly nodded, her hand resting on the butt of her Colt, her heart pounding in her chest. She trusted Jesse, trusted his instincts, but she also knew the dangers they faced. They entered the boarding house, the interior dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of stale cooking and dust. A woman stood behind the counter, her face etched with worry, her eyes wary. She looked older than Dolly had imagined Tommy's mother would be, but years on the frontier aged people quickly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice hesitant, her gaze flickering between Dolly and Jesse. Jesse stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "We're looking for someone," he said, his voice low and measured. "A woman who used to work here. A woman named Martha. Martha Miller, I believe. She had a son, Tommy." The woman's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossing her features. She glanced nervously around the room, as if expecting someone to appear. "Martha, she doesn't work here anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She left. A long time ago." Dolly sensed that the woman was lying, that she knew more than she was letting on. She stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Please," she said, her eyes pleading. "It's important. We need to find Tommy. It's a matter of life and death." The woman hesitated, her gaze shifting between Dolly and Jesse, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and compassion. She saw the desperation in their faces, the urgency in their voices. She knew that they were telling the truth, that they weren't there to cause trouble. "Martha, she's buried out back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "In the small cemetery. She died a few years ago. Of a fever." Dolly's heart sank. Martha was dead. Another lead gone. But there was still Tommy. "And Tommy?" Dolly asked, her voice urgent. "What happened to him? Do you know where he is?" The woman hesitated again, her eyes darting nervously towards the door. He left," she said, her voice trembling. "After his mother died. He went to work on a ranch. I think it was called the Bar X Ranch. It's east of here. A few days' ride." A flicker of hope rekindled in Dolly's heart. The Bar X Ranch. It was another lead, another chance. "Thank you," Dolly said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for telling us." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Be careful," she whispered. "Bart Higgins' family, they've been here, asking about Tommy. They're dangerous." Jesse and Dolly exchanged a look, their faces grim. They knew they were running out of time. They had to reach Tommy before Bart's family did. They left the boarding house, the weight of the woman's warning heavy on their shoulders. As they mounted their horses, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. It was a man, tall and menacing, his face scarred, his eyes cold and hard. He was one of Bart Higgins' kin, and he wasn't alone. Several other men emerged from the surrounding buildings, their guns drawn, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. The price of redemption, Dolly realized, might be higher than they could pay. And the cost of trust might be their very lives. The trap had been sprung. Chapter 10. A dance with danger, a waltz with desire. Well, the scarred man drawled, his voice dripping with menace. "Look what we have here. Jesse Tate, back from the dead. And with a pretty little friend, no less." Jesse's hand tightened on his gun, his eyes narrowed, assessing the situation with a cold, calculating gaze. They were outnumbered, surrounded, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. He wouldn't let them take Dolly. Jesse said, his voice calm and steady, addressing the scarred man. "This doesn't concern her. Let her go." Jed chuckled, a low, humorless sound that sent a shiver down Dolly's spine. "Oh, I think it does concern her, Tate. She's been helping you, ain't she? She's been asking questions, stirring up trouble. She's just as guilty as you are." Dolly's hand moved to her own gun, her fingers itching to draw, but she knew that would be suicide. They were surrounded, outgunned. They needed a plan, a way to escape. "We're just looking for information, Jed," Dolly said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the fear that was churning in her gut. "About Bart. About what really happened." Jed spat on the ground, his eyes filled with contempt. "You know what happened, sweetheart. Your boyfriend here killed my brother in cold blood. And now he's gonna pay. That's a lie, Jesse said, his voice unwavering. Bart drew first. It was self-defense. Self-defense? Jed roared, his face contorted with rage. You call shootin' a man in the back self-defense? He wasn't shot in the back, Dolly said, her voice rising. There was a witness. A young boy named Tommy. He saw everything. Jed's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He hadn't expected them to know about Tommy. Tommy, he's lyin', Jed said, his voice faltering slightly. He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he saw. He knows, Jesse said, his voice gaining strength. And we're gonna find him. We're gonna prove my innocence. Jed hesitated, his gaze shifting between Jesse and Dolly, his mind racing. He knew that if Tommy testified, if the truth came out, it would ruin his family's reputation, their plans for revenge. Kill them, he said suddenly, his voice cold and decisive. Kill them both. And make it look like an accident. The men surrounding them raised their guns, their fingers tightening on the triggers. Dolly closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She'd lived a hard life, faced many dangers, but she'd never felt so close to death. Suddenly, a shot rang out, but it wasn't from any of the men surrounding them. One of Jed's men crumpled to the ground, his gun falling from his hand, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. More shots followed, rapid and accurate, coming from the rooftops, from the alleyways, from the shadows. Jed's men scattered, seeking cover, their carefully laid ambush turning into chaos. Jesse grabbed Dolly's hand, pulling her towards the safety of a nearby building. Run, Dolly, he yelled, his voice urgent. Run. They ran, dodging bullets, their hearts pounding in their chests, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They reached the back of the building, finding a narrow alleyway, a possible escape route. Who was that? Dolly asked, her voice breathless, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. I don't know, Jesse said, his eyes scanning the rooftops, searching for their unknown saviors. But they saved our lives. For now. They continued to run, the sounds of gunfire fading behind them. They didn't know who had helped them, or why, but they were grateful for the unexpected intervention. They were alive for now, but they were still in danger, still hunted. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the dance with danger was far from over. The waltz with desire, the pull between them, was a dangerous melody playing amidst the chaos. They paused in the alley, catching their breath, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. The fear, the adrenaline, the unspoken longing, it all swirled between them, a potent, dangerous cocktail. He reached out, brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, and the simple touch sent shivers down her spine. They had to keep moving, but for that one heartbeat, they were lost in each other, the world outside the alley fading away. Then, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment, and they were running again, hand in hand, into the unknown. Chapter 11. Letters unsent, words unspoken. They found refuge in a deserted barn on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a temporary sanctuary from the storm that raged around them. The barn was old and dilapidated, the roof leaking, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay, but it was safe for now. They collapsed onto a pile of hay, their bodies aching, their minds racing. They were both exhausted, both physically and emotionally drained, but they couldn't rest, not yet. They needed to figure out who had helped them, why, and what their next move should be. Someone in town must be on our side, Dolly said, her voice thoughtful, her gaze fixed on the cracks of light filtering through the wooden slats of the barn. Someone who knows the truth about Bart, about you. Jesse nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. But who? And why would they risk their lives to help us? Bart's family, they have a lot of power in this town. People are afraid of them. Maybe it's someone who's not afraid, Dolly said, her voice firm. Someone who believes in justice, in doing what's right. She paused, her mind drifting back to the boarding house, to the woman who had told them about Tommy, about his mother. She remembered the fear in the woman's eyes, but also the compassion, the hint of defiance. The woman at the boarding house, Dolly said, her voice suddenly urgent. I think she knows more than she let on. I think she might be involved somehow." Jesse looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and hope. "You think she sent those men to help us?" "I don't know," Dolly said, her voice hesitant. "But it's worth investigating." She seemed scared, but also determined. Like she wanted to help, but was afraid of the consequences. They decided to return to the boarding house, under the cover of darkness, to try to talk to the woman again, to see if they could get more information from her. It was a risky move, but they were running out of options, running out of time. As they waited for nightfall, they sat in silence, their thoughts drifting, their emotions raw. The closeness, the shared danger, the unspoken longing between them created a palpable tension, a magnetic pull that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jesse reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, worn leather pouch. He opened it, revealing a handful of letters, their edges frayed, their ink faded. These are letters I wrote to you," he said, his voice low and husky, his gaze fixed on the letters, his fingers tracing the faded script. "After I left. I never sent them." Dolly's heart skipped a beat. Letters? He had written to her? She had spent years wondering, hoping, praying for some word from him, some sign that he still cared. And all this time, he had written but never sent them. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and hurt. "Why didn't you send them?" He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a deep, aching regret. I was afraid," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Afraid of what you would think of me. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of facing the consequences of my actions." He paused, his gaze shifting back to the letters, his fingers clutching them tightly. "I was a coward, Dolly," he said, his voice laced with self-reproach. "I ran away from my problems, from my responsibilities from you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just hurting you." Dolly reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I understand, Jesse," she said, her voice soft, her eyes filled with compassion. "It was a difficult time. For both of us." She wanted to read the letters, to know what he had written, what he had felt, but she also knew that it was a private matter, a glimpse into his soul that he might not be ready to share. "You don't have to show them to me, Jesse," she said, her voice hesitant. "If you don't want to." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Dolly," he whispered, "for understanding." He put the letters back in the pouch, tucking them away safely in his pocket. The unspoken words, the unsent letters, remained a silent testament to their shared past, to the love that had been lost, and perhaps the hope that it could be found again. The weight of what wasn't said hung heavier than what was, a stark reminder of the years that had passed, the opportunities missed, the chasm that still lay between them, despite their rekindled connection. It was a chasm they would have to bridge, one unspoken word at a time. Chapter 12. The Ghost of Yesterday's Promises. Under the cloak of a moonless night, they returned to Willow Creek. The town was eerily quiet, the streets deserted, the windows of the houses dark and uninviting. The silence was unsettling, a stark contrast to the chaos of their previous encounter with Bart Higgins' kin. It felt as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the next act in the unfolding drama. They approached the boarding house cautiously, their senses heightened, their hands never far from their guns. The building was dark, except for a single flickering light in an upstairs window. It was a sign, perhaps, or a trap. They didn't know, but they had to take the chance. Jesse tried the front door, finding it unlocked. He exchanged a look with Dolly, a silent communication that spoke volumes. They entered the boarding house, the interior shrouded in shadows, the air heavy with the scent of dust and something else. Something metallic, something ominous. They moved silently through the darkened hallway, their boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. They reached the stairs, ascending slowly, carefully, their eyes scanning the shadows, their ears straining for any sound. They reached the upstairs landing, the flickering light emanating from a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of light to spill out into the darkness. Jesse pushed the door open slowly, revealing a scene that made their blood run cold. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers scattered, drawers pulled out and emptied. And in the center of the room, lying in a pool of blood, was the woman from the boarding house, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, her body lifeless. Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. She had known the woman was in danger, had sensed her fear, her desperation, but she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected such brutality, such finality. Jesse knelt beside the body, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He examined the woman's wounds, his expression hardening. She was tortured, he said, his voice low and hoarse, his jaw tight. They were looking for something. For Tommy. Dolly's mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene, trying to piece together the events that had led to this tragic outcome. The woman had known about Tommy, had known where he was, but she had been reluctant to tell them, afraid of the consequences. Bart's family had found her, had tortured her, had killed her, but had they gotten the information they were looking for? She noticed a small, crumpled piece of paper clutched in the woman's hand, partially hidden beneath her body. She carefully pried it loose, her fingers trembling, her heart pounding with a sense of dread. She unfolded the paper, revealing a hastily scrawled message, written in a shaky hand. It was a single word, run. Dolly's eyes met Jesse's, their faces pale, their expressions grim. The message was clear. Tommy was in danger, grave danger. Bart's family knew where he was, or at least, they thought they did. They didn't get it, Jesse said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes fixed on the message. She didn't tell them. She sacrificed herself to protect Tommy. He stood up, his hand tightening into a fist, his eyes filled with a burning rage. We have to get to the Bar X ranch, he said, his voice resolute. We have to warn Tommy. Before it's too late. They left the boarding house, the ghost of the woman's sacrifice haunting them, the weight of her unspoken promise heavy on their shoulders. They rode out of Willow Creek, the town shrouded in darkness and silence, the only sound the pounding of their horses' hooves and the frantic beating of their hearts. The past, it seemed, was not done with them yet. The promises of yesterday, broken and betrayed, were now demanding to be reckoned with, in blood and in tears. The race was on, a desperate race against time, against death, against the relentless pursuit of vengeance. Chapter 13. Between a rock and a heart's hard place. The ride to the Bar X ranch was a blur of dust, sweat, and adrenaline. Dolly and Jesse pushed their horses to their limits, the urgency of their mission fueling their desperate flight. The landscape whizzed by, a monotonous expanse of rock and scrub, the silence broken only by the pounding of hooves and the ragged gasps of their breaths. They arrived at the Bar X ranch as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful backdrop to a potentially deadly confrontation. The ranch was a sprawling complex of buildings, corrals, and grazing land, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills. It looked peaceful, idyllic, but Dolly knew that beneath the surface, danger lurked. They approached the ranch cautiously, their senses heightened, their hands never far from their guns. They didn't know what to expect, whether Bart's family was already there, whether Tommy was still alive, whether they were walking into a trap. They dismounted near the main house, a large, two-story structure with a wide veranda, its windows dark and uninviting. They tied their horses to a hitching post, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of danger. "Stay close," Jesse whispered, his voice low and urgent, his eyes meeting Dolly's. "And be ready for anything." Dolly nodded, her hand resting on the butt of her Colt, her heart pounding in her chest. She trusted Jesse, trusted his instincts, but she also knew that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. They approached the front door, Jesse taking the lead, his gun drawn, his body tense, ready to react. He knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the silent morning air. They waited, their breaths held, their senses on high alert. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant crowing of a rooster and the frantic beating of their hearts. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a young man, his face wary, his eyes questioning. He looked to be in his early 20s, with tousled brown hair, a smattering of freckles, and a nervous expression. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice hesitant, his gaze flickering between Dolly and Jesse. Jesse lowered his gun slightly, but kept it ready. "We're looking for Tommy," he said, his voice low and measured. "Tommy Miller." The young man's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossing his features. He glanced nervously around, as if expecting someone to appear. "Tommy, he ain't here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. He left. A few days ago." Dolly sensed that the young man was lying, that he knew more than he was letting on. She stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Please," she said, her eyes pleading. "It's important. We need to find him. He's in danger." The young man hesitated, his gaze shifting between Dolly and Jesse, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and compassion. He saw the desperation in their faces, the urgency in their voices. He knew that they were telling the truth, that they weren't there to cause trouble. But he also knew the dangers of crossing Bart Higgins' family. He was caught between a rock and hard place, trapped by loyalty, fear, and the fragile hope of doing the right thing. His heart was the hard place. He's out back," he whispered finally. "In the stables." Jesse and Dolly were between hope and despair. They didn't know what to believe. How much truth was masked with lies? Chapter 14. The sheriff's pursuit, the outlaw's flight. Relief washed over Dolly, quickly followed by a surge of renewed urgency. "Thank you," she said to the young man, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means." Jesse, ever vigilant, kept his eyes on the young ranch hand. "Is Bart Higgins' family here?" he asked, his voice sharp. The young man shook his head, his eyes wide with fear.
"No, sir.
They were here a couple of days ago, asking about Tommy. But they left. Said they were going back to Willow Creek." A lie? A trap? Jesse couldn't be sure, but they had no time to waste. "Lead us to him," he said, his voice firm. The young man hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his shoulders slumping in resignation. He led them around the side of the house, towards a large stable building, its doors closed, its interior shrouded in shadows. As they approached the stable, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. It was a posse, and they were riding hard. "Jedediah," Dolly breathed, her heart sinking. The sheriff had kept his word. The one-day reprieve was over. Jesse cursed under his breath. They were trapped. Bart's family might not be at the ranch, but the law was, and that was just as dangerous, if not more so. "Inside," Jesse said, his voice urgent, pushing Dolly towards the stable door. "Quickly." The young ranch hand fumbled with the latch, his hands trembling. He pushed the door open, revealing the dim interior of the stable, the air thick with the smell of hay and horses. "Tommy," Jesse called out, his voice echoing through the building. "Tommy, it's Jesse Tate. We need to talk to you." A figure emerged from the shadows, a young man, slightly older than the one who had led them there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. It was Tommy, the witness, the key to Jesse's redemption.
"Jesse?"
Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. What are you doing here?" "We need your help, Tommy," Jesse said, his voice urgent. "You saw what happened with Bart Higgins. You know I didn't shoot him in the back. You know he drew first." Tommy's eyes darted nervously towards the entrance of the stable, towards the sound of the approaching posse. I can't," he whispered, his voice choked with fear. "They'll kill me. Bart's family, they'll kill me." "We won't let them, Tommy," Dolly said, her voice firm, stepping forward. "We'll protect you. But you have to tell the truth. You have to clear Jesse's name." Before Tommy could answer, the posse arrived, their horses skidding to a halt outside the stable, their riders dismounting, their guns drawn. Jedediah Stone, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and regret, stepped forward. "Jessie Tate," he called out, his voice booming.
"Come out."
"With your hands up. It's over." Jessie exchanged a look with Dolly, their faces pale, their expressions grim. They were trapped, cornered, with no way out. The sheriff's pursuit had ended, and the outlaw's flight was over. But the fight for the truth, the fight for redemption, was just beginning. He knew, looking at Dolly, that even if his flight was over, his fight for her and for a future had only begun. The stable doors felt like the gateway to a future he couldn't quite grasp. Chapter 15. A Showdown at Twilight's Edge. Jessie took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. He knew he couldn't outrun the law, not anymore. He had to face the consequences of his past, had to fight for his future, for Dolly. "Stay here," he whispered to Dolly and Tommy, his voice low and urgent. "No matter what happens, stay hidden." Dolly's eyes filled with tears, her hand reaching out to him, her fingers clutching his arm. "Jessie, don't," she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. "There has to be another way." He gently pried her fingers loose, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of love, regret, and determination. "There isn't, darling," he said softly. "This is the only way. I have to do this." He turned and walked towards the entrance of the stable, his steps slow and deliberate, his hands held high, his gun holstered. He stepped out into the sunlight, squinting against the glare, his figure silhouetted against the backdrop of the approaching posse. "Jedediah," Jessie said, his voice calm and steady, his gaze meeting the sheriff's. "I'm here."
"I'm unarmed."
Jedediah Stone, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and resolve, approached Jessie, his gun drawn, his deputies flanking him, their weapons trained on the outlaw. "You made a mistake coming back, Jessie," Jedediah said, his voice heavy with regret. "You should have stayed gone." "I had to come back, Jedediah," Jessie said, his voice firm. "I had to clear my name. I didn't kill Bart Higgins in cold blood. He drew first. It was self-defense." Jedediah sighed, running a hand over his weathered face. "I know you're not a cold-blooded killer, Jessie," he said, his voice softening slightly. "But that ain't gonna matter much to Bart's kin. Or to the law. You killed a man, Jessie. And there are consequences." "There was a witness, Jedediah," Jessie said, his voice urgent. "A young boy named Tommy Miller. He saw everything. He can testify that Bart drew first." Jedediah's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He hadn't known about a witness, hadn't been told about Tommy. "Where is this witness, Jessie?" he asked, his voice cautious. "He's here," Jessie said, his gaze flickering towards the stable. "He's hiding inside. He's afraid, Jedediah. Afraid of Bart's family." Before Jedediah could respond, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Jessie's head, embedding itself in the wooden frame of the stable door. The posse scattered, seeking cover, their guns drawn, their eyes scanning the surrounding buildings, searching for the shooter. "Ambush!" one of the deputies yelled, his voice filled with panic. More shots followed, rapid and accurate, coming from the nearby hills, from the rooftops of the ranch buildings. It was Bart Higgins' family, making their move, their vengeance fueled by hate and a thirst for blood. Jessie dove for cover, rolling behind a water trough, his heart pounding in his chest. He was caught in the crossfire, between the law and the outlaws, between his past and his future. He saw Dolly emerge from the stable, her gun drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She was looking for him, trying to protect him, even as she put herself in harm's way. "Dolly, get back inside," he yelled, his voice urgent, his heart filled with dread. But it was too late. One of Bart Higgins' men, hidden on the roof of the barn, spotted her. He raised his rifle, taking aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. The showdown at Twilight's Edge had begun, and Dolly was caught in the middle, a pawn in a deadly game of revenge, a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty in a world consumed by violence and hatred. The air crackled with tension, with the promise of more bloodshed, more loss, more heartache. Jessie knew he had to act, had to save her, even if it meant sacrificing himself. This was his reckoning. Chapter 16. Broken Bonds, Forged Alliances. Jesse saw the gunman aiming at Dolly, his heart leaping into his throat. He reacted instinctively, his body moving before his mind could even process the danger. He scrambled to his feet, drawing his own gun, his aim swift and sure. He fired, the shot echoing through the chaotic scene, the bullet finding its mark. The gunman on the roof crumpled, his rifle falling from his grasp, his body tumbling to the ground. But it wasn't over. More shots rang out, from all directions, the air filled with the whine of bullets, the shouts of men, the screams of horses. Jesse knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, caught in a deadly trap. He had to get Dolly to safety, had to get Tommy out of there, had to find a way to survive. He ran towards the stable, dodging bullets, his eyes fixed on Dolly, his heart pounding with fear and determination. He reached her, grabbing her hand, pulling her towards the back of the stable, towards a small, hidden door that led to the open fields. "We have to go, Dolly," he said, his voice urgent, his breath coming in ragged gasps.
Now.
Dolly nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a steely resolve. She trusted Jesse, trusted his instincts, trusted his love. They reached the back door, Jesse kicking it open, revealing the vast expanse of the open fields, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was a chance, a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. "Tommy, come on," Jesse yelled, his voice echoing through the stable. Tommy emerged from the shadows, his face pale, his body trembling, but he followed them, his fear outweighed by his loyalty to Jesse, by his desire to do what was right. They ran, their legs pumping, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding in their chests. They ran towards freedom, towards a future that seemed so uncertain, so fragile, yet so worth fighting for. As they ran, they heard a shout from behind them, a voice filled with authority, with a surprising note of support. "Go, Jesse." It was Jedediah Stone, the sheriff, his gun drawn, firing at Bart Higgins' men, providing them with cover, buying them time. "Get that boy to safety. Tell the truth." Jesse was stunned. Jedediah, the man who had sworn to bring him to justice, was now helping him escape.
Why?
What had changed? He didn't have time to question it, to analyze it. He just ran, faster, harder, fueled by a renewed sense of hope, by a glimmer of belief that maybe, just maybe, they could make it. Jedediah's actions had forged an unlikely alliance, a bond between the lawman and the outlaw, united by a common goal, to uncover the truth, to bring justice to a town consumed by vengeance. The broken bonds of the past, the shattered trust, were being replaced by a fragile, tentative alliance, forged in the heat of battle, in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a testament to the enduring power of truth, of justice, of the human spirit's capacity for redemption. But the battle was far from over, the road ahead long and dangerous, the future still shrouded in uncertainty. They were running, but they were also fighting for their lives, for their love, for their future. The open field stretched before them, a symbol of both freedom and vulnerability. They were exposed, vulnerable, but they were also free to run, free to fight, free to choose their own destiny. Chapter 17. The Reckoning of Old Wounds. They ran until they could run no more, their bodies exhausted, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding. They found refuge in a small, secluded canyon, hidden from view, a temporary sanctuary from the relentless pursuit of Bart Higgins' family and, potentially, any remaining deputies loyal to the corrupt element in Willow Creek. They collapsed onto the rocky ground, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. They were safe for now, but they knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They had to keep moving, had to find a way to get Tommy to safety, to get him to testify, to clear Jesse's name. Dolly looked at Jesse, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. He was wounded, a bullet grazed on his arm, bleeding but not life-threatening. She tore a strip of cloth from her skirt, gently cleaning and bandaging the wound, her touch tender, her heart aching for the pain he must be feeling. "Thank you, darlin'," Jesse said, his voice low and husky, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. Tommy sat nearby, his face pale, his body trembling, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. He had witnessed the violence, the chaos, the near-death experiences, and he knew he was the cause, the catalyst for all the bloodshed. "I'm sorry, Jesse," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the ground.
This is all my fault.
If I hadn't Jesse reached out, placing a comforting hand on Tommy's shoulder. "It's not your fault, Tommy," he said, his voice firm. "You didn't do anything wrong. You just saw the truth. And that's what scares them." "But people are dead," Tommy said, his voice choked with emotion. "Because of me." "They're dead because of Bart Higgins' greed and lies," Dolly said, her voice strong, her eyes filled with compassion. "They're dead because of their own choices, not because of you." They sat in silence for a while, their thoughts heavy, their emotions raw. The weight of the past, the burden of the present, the uncertainty of the future pressed down on them, threatening to crush their spirits. But they couldn't give up. They had come too far, risked too much, lost too much. They had to keep fighting for themselves, for each other, for the truth. Jesse looked at Dolly, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. He had been running for so long, running from his past, from his responsibilities, from his feelings. But he couldn't run anymore. He had to face his demons, had to confront the consequences of his actions, had to fight for the woman he loved. "Dolly," he said, his voice low and husky, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I love you. I always have. Even when I left, I never stopped loving you." Dolly's eyes filled with tears, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and sorrow. She had waited so long to hear those words, had yearned for his touch, for his love. "I love you too, Jesse," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never stopped loving you either." They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love, a moment of solace in the midst of chaos, a moment of hope in the face of despair. The reckoning of old wounds was painful, a process of confronting the past, of acknowledging the mistakes, of forgiving and being forgiven. But it was also a necessary process, a cleansing process, a healing process. It was a way to move forward, to build a new future, a future based on truth, on love, on trust. The canyon walls seemed to echo their whispered words of love, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, its capacity for forgiveness, for healing, for new beginnings. But the outside world still loomed, a threat, a reminder that their peace was fragile, their future uncertain. Chapter 18. Under a sky of 1,000 regrets. The night sky above the canyon was a breathtaking tapestry of stars, a vast, infinite expanse of twinkling lights that seemed to mock their earthly struggles, their petty conflicts, their fleeting lives. Yet, beneath that sky of 1,000 regrets, there was also a sense of peace, a sense of perspective, a sense of hope. They shared a meager meal of dried meat and water, their conversation subdued, their thoughts focused on the challenges that lay ahead. They knew they couldn't stay in the canyon forever. They had to find a way to get Tommy to a safe place, to a town where he could testify, where justice could be served. "We need to get to Tucson," Jesse said, his voice thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of their small campfire. "It's the closest town with a federal marshal. Someone who can't be bought by Bart Higgins' family." Dolly nodded, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. "It's a long ride," she said, her voice cautious. "And dangerous. We'll be exposed, vulnerable. We'll take the back trails," Jesse said, his voice firm. "Avoid the main roads. Stick to the mountains. It'll be slower, but safer." Tommy, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke up, his voice hesitant, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I want to do this, Jesse," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to tell the truth. I want to clear your name. I want justice." Jesse reached out, placing a comforting hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I know you do, Tommy," he said, his voice gentle. "And I appreciate it. More than you know." They made their plans, their preparations, their hearts filled with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. They knew the journey to Tucson would be perilous, fraught with danger, but they were determined to see it through, to fight for justice, for truth, for a future free from the shadows of the past. As the night wore on, the conversation dwindled, replaced by a comfortable silence, a shared understanding, a silent pact forged under the vast, indifferent sky. Dolly and Jesse sat close together, their bodies touching, their hands clasped, their love a silent beacon in the darkness. Jesse looked at Dolly, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love, a love that had survived years of separation, of hardship, of betrayal. He had made so many mistakes, had caused so much pain, had hurt the woman he loved more than anything in the world. "I'm sorry, Dolly," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, his hand tightening around hers. "For everything. For leaving you, for hurting you, for putting you in danger." Dolly leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing, her heart aching for the pain he had endured, for the regrets he carried. "It's all right, Jesse," she whispered back, her voice soft, her hand stroking his arm. "The past is the past. We can't change it. All we can do is learn from it and move forward." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, his soul laid bare. "I don't deserve you, Dolly," he said, his voice raw with emotion.
You're too good for me.
"You deserve better." Dolly lifted her head, meeting his gaze, her eyes filled with a fierce love, an unwavering belief in him. "You're wrong, Jesse," she said, her voice firm. "You are a good man. You've made mistakes, yes, but you're not defined by them. You're defined by your heart, by your courage, by your willingness to fight for what's right." She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had welled up in his eyes. "I love you, Jesse Tate," she said, her voice strong and clear. "And I believe in you. We'll get through this.
Together."
They kissed, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of forgiveness, of hope. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, that strengthened their resolve, that gave them the courage to face the challenges that lay ahead. The sky above them, with its countless stars, seemed to bear witness to their love, to their commitment, to their unwavering belief in a better future. It was a future they would fight for, together, under a sky that held not only regrets, but also the promise of redemption. They knew the dawn would bring new dangers, new challenges, but for now, in the quiet solitude of the canyon, under the watchful gaze of the stars, they found solace in each other's arms, in each other's love. Chapter 19. The Last Stand for Love and Liberty. The journey to Tucson was a grueling test of endurance, a relentless race against time and the elements. They rode through rugged terrain, across vast deserts, over towering mountains, their bodies aching, their spirits tested, their determination unwavering. They avoided the main roads, sticking to hidden trails, relying on Jesse's knowledge of the land, his outlaw instincts honed by years of living on the run. They slept under the stars, ate meager meals, their conversations sparse, their focus laser-sharp on reaching their destination. They encountered dangers along the way, rattlesnakes, scorpions, the scorching sun, the freezing nights. But they persevered, their love for each other, their commitment to justice, their shared hope for a better future, fueling their relentless pursuit. As they neared Tucson, they could feel the tension mounting, the anticipation building. They knew that Bart Higgins' family would be waiting for them, that the final showdown was inevitable. They arrived in Tucson under the cover of darkness, the town a sprawling maze of streets and buildings, a haven for both law-abiding citizens and those who lived on the fringes of society. They found a secluded stable on the outskirts of town, a temporary refuge where they could rest and plan their next move. Jesse knew they couldn't just walk into the federal marshal's office. Bart Higgins' family would be watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. They needed a plan, a strategy, a way to get Tommy to safety, to ensure that he could testify, that the truth would finally be revealed. "We need help," Dolly said, her voice thoughtful, her gaze fixed on the flickering lantern light that illuminated the stable. Someone we can trust. Someone who knows the town, who knows the marshal. Jesse nodded, his mind racing, trying to think of someone, anyone, who could help them. He had been away for so long, had burned so many bridges, had made so many enemies. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, a faint glimmer of hope in the darkness. He remembered an old friend, a former associate, a man named Silas, who had settled in Tucson, running a small blacksmith shop. Silas was a gruff, no-nonsense man, but he had a good heart, a strong sense of justice. Silas, Jesse said, his voice firm. He might help us. He's a blacksmith, works just off Main Street. He owes me a favor. They decided to seek out Silas, under the cover of darkness, to see if he would be willing to help them. It was a risky move, but they were running out of options, running out of time. They left Tommy hidden in the stable, under Dolly's watchful eye, while Jesse went to find Silas. The streets of Tucson were quiet, the saloons still bustling with activity, the shadows concealing potential dangers. Jesse found Silas's blacksmith shop, a small, unassuming building, the sound of hammering emanating from within, a familiar rhythm that brought back a flood of memories. He entered the shop, the interior dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. Silas, a large, burly man with a grizzled beard and calloused hands, looked up from his work, his eyes narrowing in surprise.
Jesse?
He said, his voice gruff, his gaze questioning. Jesse Tate? What in tarnation are you doing here? Jesse explained the situation, his voice low and urgent, his words tumbling out in a rush. He told Silas about Bart Higgins, about Tommy, about the need to get to the federal marshal. Silas listened patiently, his expression hardening, his eyes filled with a growing anger. He had heard rumors about Bart Higgins' family, about their ruthlessness, their corruption. I'll help you, Jesse, Silas said, his voice firm, his hand clasping Jesse's in a strong grip. I always repay my debts. And I believe in justice. We'll get that boy to the marshal. We'll make sure the truth comes out. They made their plans, their strategy, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. The last stand for love and liberty was about to begin, a final confrontation between good and evil, between truth and lies, between the past and the future. It was a stand they would make together, united by friendship, by loyalty, by a shared commitment to justice. The forge glowed red-hot, a symbol of the fiery determination that burned within them, a promise of the battle to come. They had to get Dolly and Tommy, and then they would be ready to expose the truth. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. With Silas's help, they devised a plan to get Tommy to the federal marshal's office. It was a daring plan, fraught with risk, but it was their only chance. They would use the back alleys, the hidden passages, the network of tunnels that Silas knew so well, to bypass Bart Higgins' men, to reach the marshal's office undetected. They returned to the stable, gathering Dolly and Tommy, explaining the plan, their voices low and urgent, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They set out under the cover of darkness, Silas leading the way, his knowledge of Tucson's underbelly their guiding light. They moved swiftly and silently through narrow alleys, across rooftops, down into dark, damp tunnels, their senses on high alert, their hands never far from their guns. They could feel the eyes of Bart Higgins' men on them, could sense their presence in the shadows, their relentless pursuit fueled by vengeance and a desperate desire to silence the truth. They reached the back entrance of the federal marshal's office, a nondescript door hidden in a narrow alleyway. Silas produced a key, unlocking the door, ushering them inside. They found themselves in a small, dimly lit room, the air thick with the smell of old paper and stale tobacco. A single lamp illuminated a desk, behind which sat a man in a uniform, his face stern, his eyes questioning. Marshal Thompson, Silas said, his voice firm, addressing the man. This is Jesse Tate, Dolly McGraw, and Tommy Miller. They need your protection. And Tommy, He has a story to tell. The marshal, a tall, imposing figure with a steely gaze, listened intently as Tommy recounted the events of that fateful day, the day Bart Higgins had drawn on Jesse, the day Jesse had acted in self-defense. He told the truth, the whole truth, his voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as he spoke, his words painting a vivid picture of the violence, the betrayal, the injustice. The marshal heard him out, his expression unchanging, his eyes assessing, evaluating. When Tommy was finished, he turned to Jesse. "Is this true, Tate?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Every word, Marshal," Jesse said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't want to kill Bart Higgins, but he gave me no choice." The marshal looked at Dolly, his gaze softening slightly. "And you, ma'am? You corroborate the story?" "I do, Marshal," Dolly said, her voice strong and clear. "I was there. I saw it all. Jesse acted in self-defense." The marshal nodded slowly, his mind processing the information, weighing the evidence. He knew Bart Higgins' family, knew their reputation, their power, their influence. But he also knew that Tommy's testimony was compelling, that it rang true. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and a group of men stormed in, their guns drawn, their faces contorted with rage. It was Bart Higgins' family, led by Jed, the scarred man who had orchestrated the ambush in Willow Creek. "There he is!" Jed yelled, his voice filled with venom.
Kill him.
"Kill them all!" Chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the small room, the air thick with smoke, the shouts of men, the screams of the innocent. Jesse pushed Dolly and Tommy behind the marshal's desk, shielding them with his body, his own gun drawn, firing back at Bart Higgins' men. Silas, armed with a blacksmith's hammer, fought alongside Jesse, his blows heavy and accurate, his courage unwavering. The marshal, despite being caught off guard, reacted swiftly, drawing his own gun, joining the fight, upholding the law, defending the innocent. It was a fierce, brutal battle, a close-quarters gunfight, a desperate struggle for survival. One by one, Bart Higgins' men fell, their bodies crumpling to the floor, their vengeance thwarted, their lies exposed. Finally, only Jed remained, his face contorted with rage and desperation, his gun aimed at Jesse. "You'll never win, Tate," he spat, his voice filled with hatred. "You'll never escape your past." "My past doesn't define me, Jesse said, his voice calm and steady, his gaze unwavering. "My choices do. And I choose to fight for the truth. I choose to fight for justice. I choose to fight for Dolly." He fired, his shot true, hitting Jed squarely in the chest. Jed stumbled backward, his gun falling from his hand, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He collapsed to the floor, his body lifeless, his reign of terror over. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors, the lingering scent of gunpowder, the aftermath of a violent, decisive confrontation. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons had ended. The truth had prevailed. Justice had been served. Love had triumphed. The long, arduous journey, the relentless pursuit, the countless sacrifices had led to this moment, a moment of reckoning, a moment of redemption, a moment of new beginnings. Jesse and Dolly embraced, their bodies trembling, their hearts overflowing with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and love. They had survived. They had won. They had a future together. The horizon stretched before them, vast and limitless, filled with possibilities, with hope, with the promise of a life lived in freedom, in truth, in love. The final gunshot echoed not as an ending, but as the resounding start of their new life, a life they would build together, brick by brick, on the foundation of truth and love. Epilogue. The sun rose over Tucson, casting a golden glow on the town, washing away the shadows of the night, illuminating a new day, a new beginning. The federal marshal, having heard Tommy's testimony and witnessed the violent confrontation, cleared Jesse Tate of all charges. The truth, so long suppressed, so fiercely contested, had finally prevailed. Jessie and Dolly, their hands clasped, their hearts intertwined, walked out of the marshal's office, stepping into the bright morning light, their faces radiant, their spirits soaring. They were free. Free from the past, free from the accusations, free to build a future together. They left Tucson, riding side by side, their horses' hooves beating a steady rhythm against the dusty ground, a rhythm of hope, of resilience, of enduring love. They returned to Redemption, to Dolly's ranch, the place where their story had begun, the place where they would now build their new life. The town of Redemption, once a place of fear and suspicion, now welcomed them with open arms. The truth about Bart Higgins' family had spread like wildfire, their reign of terror over, their power broken. The townsfolk, who had once whispered behind their hands, now greeted Dolly and Jessie with smiles and nods, their respect and admiration evident. Jessie and Dolly rebuilt the ranch, working side by side, their love a constant source of strength and inspiration. They raised horses, cultivated the land, their days filled with hard work, shared laughter, and quiet evenings spent under the vast, star-studded sky. They never forgot the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost, the battles that had been fought. They honored the memory of the boarding house woman, of Sheriff Thompson, of all those who had stood for truth and justice. Years passed, turning into decades. Jessie and Dolly grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond unbreakable. Their hair turned silver, their faces lined with wrinkles, their bodies bearing the marks of time and hardship, but their eyes still shone with the same love, the same passion, the same unwavering commitment to each other. They often sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, reminiscing about their past, about their adventures, about the challenges they had overcome. They spoke of the outlaw days, of the gunfights, of the narrow escapes, but always with a sense of gratitude, a sense of perspective, a sense of peace. They had found redemption, not just in the eyes of the law, but in each other's hearts. They had built a life together, a life based on truth, on love, on trust. They had proven that even in the harshest of landscapes, even in the most unforgiving of circumstances, love could flourish, hope could endure, and justice could prevail. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge, Jessie reached for Dolly's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, his touch still sending shivers down her spine, even after all these years. "I love you, darlin'," he whispered, his voice raspy with age, but filled with the same love, the same passion he had felt for her all those years ago. Dolly smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy, her heart overflowing with love. "I love you too, Jessie," she whispered back. "Always and forever." They sat in silence, their hands clasped, their hearts content, their souls at peace. The vast, star-studded sky above them seemed to embrace them, a silent testament to their enduring love, to their extraordinary journey, to their triumphant victory over adversity. Their story, a story of outlaws and reckoning, of love and redemption, had reached its end, but their love story, a timeless tale of two souls bound together by fate, by courage, by an unwavering commitment to each other, would live on forever, whispered on the desert wind, etched in the sands of time, a legend told and retold under the vast, eternal sky. The quiet of the desert night embraced them, a final, peaceful curtain call on a life well lived, a love well earned.